So I learned a lot about life and a lot of key lessons in my life from my grandfather. Growing up as a kid, my grandfather and I were quite close. I grew up with my grandparents, so my grandpa and I spent a lot of time together, especially when I was quite young. And so, because of it, he kind of imparted a lot of the lessons of life and stuff like that, and a lot of it is stuff that's really stuck with me through the years and has benefited me in maturing and the life that I've lived. And my grandfather holds a special place in my memory and in my heart and stuff like that. Um, but there's a story in particular that always comes to mind when I think of those life lessons and the things that he imparted to me, I'd like to just share it a little bit. Um, so when I can't remember when it was. It was about the mid 70s. So I was maybe 5, 6 years old, something like that. And my grandpa and I went to the post office together, right? And I mean, we had all kinds of excursions and stuff like that him and I went on together. Um, he had, an old pickup truck. I think back then, I think he might have still had an old International that he had rebuilt or something like that I loved dearly, that truck. But anyways, nonetheless, Grandpa and I went to the post office together, and it wasn't uncommon. Small town post office was a bit of a social place. So it wasn't uncommon when we went to the post office to check the mail, to check in our mailbox, for Grandpa to bump into someone who he knew. Was pretty common, right? And so usually that meant, a conversation, sometimes a long one, sometimes a short one, sometimes just a few laughs, depending on the person and stuff like that. And often for me, I mean, as a child, I was quite impatient. Let's go, right? And stuff, and I didn't want to wait around. But this particular time that we were at the post office, I remember there was an old man. And just as we were leaving, this old man was coming in, and he started talking to my grandpa, and this old man started ranting and raving, and he was angry, and he was swearing and saying a lot of bad words. And it was kind of startling for me, being, like I said, maybe 5, 6 years old. And he was talking about how, if memory serves, he was talking about how, things in this town are not going right, and we're the ones who built this town in 1956, and we need to be reckoned with, and all of this stuff. And my grandpa was just, kind of, listening to him and just, nodding his head and whatever. And eventually we where the conversation ended, and someone else, I think, came in, and the man started ranting and raving to him instead. And my grandpa said, well, I got to get going. And we left. And so when we got into the truck and we started driving away, my grandpa took the opportunity to talk to me. And he said, maybe you're wondering about that man. And you heard him saying a lot of bad words and swearing and being really angry and aggressive and all that stuff. And so we talked a bit about it, and he explained to me. He explained that man had been superintendent when the town was built. So again, in Western Canada in the 50s and even into the, I think, 60s and 70s, when a industry came to town, whether it was a pulp mill, a sawmill, a mine, they built the whole town. So in my case, the town I'm from had a pulp mill, and that pulp mill was built, and then they had to also build 250 houses to house the families of the people who were going to work in that pulp mill. And basically the whole town sprung up, right? And amongst that, hotels got built and stores and there weren't really malls in those days, but there were kind of like strip malls and, little commercial areas and stuff like that. And so in those days when the town had been built, when my grandpa and grandma first came there, that man, that angry man, had been a superintendent and had been coordinating the building of, I don't know whether it was the pulp mill or the houses or what it was, but he had a lot of power and he had a lot of say, and he, what he said went. And when he said something, people listened, because if they didn't, they lost their jobs. And if he didn't like someone, you didn't have to think that person was going to be working in the town or whatever. And which was the nature of these things, right? The we needed, the men like that were needed for these projects and are needed even to this day and age as, project managers of varying degrees. Um, so, but the time came, and my grandpa explained to me that the time came that this man, as we all do, he grew old and he retired, and his retirement had been a happy occasion, and he was really, everybody, they held a big party and everybody's real happy, and hey, good for you, you've earned your retirement and all that stuff, all the hard work you did, and all that, and he had a successor, who he passed on whatever he had been doing. At that point, I mean, I think later on maybe he had worked for the town or something like that, and eventually, I mean, unfortunately, one of the things that this man, was encountering is as he got older and was retired and wasn't part of all that anymore. My grandpa explained how he didn't have the power anymore. He didn't have the control anymore that he had, and that hurt him, and that left him feeling kind of bitter, and that was what I was seeing was, an old man who had a lot had a lot of power and control and a lot of say in what people did and stuff, who no longer did have that say, and he was frustrated and he was bitter, and my grandpa knew him and treated him respectfully. And so the big lesson that I got out of all of that is that, those, to be careful of the things that I consider power and control, and the things in my life that I think that I'm so damn smart at and so damn good at, and to remember that someone else is going to come along no matter what it is that I do that I think is so special. I'm talking specifically about, work and occupations, but there's always someone who's willing to do it, who's got another way, and who I'm not necessarily going to agree with, but that doesn't make them wrong. So yeah, so that was just one of those really important lessons of life that I learned from my grandpa.